Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hill Shadows podcast. We are officially here to bring in the month of October. My name is Jeremiah, and with me, as always, is Ashley.
Hey.
How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad I can sleep in the morning a little bit.
You excited it's first day of October?
I am. Yeah, I like it.
Me too.
I like fall time.
My favorite
I'm really
month.
enjoying the weather.
Or season as well.
The season and the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a bit cooler. Obviously, you don't see us on video. It's been kind of a busy week, I guess.
Yeah, I had a couple unexpected things I had
Yeah,
to
a
take
couple
care
things popped up, so next week I'm not gonna do it if I'm not on video, so I'll do it. We'll be up next week. We will have video. I don't know what kind of quality it'll be, but it'll be something for sure. And I hope everybody's in the spirit, the Halloween spirit. Not to say that you guys are like practicing or partaking in witchcraft or anything, but just to be just feeling the spirit. Same thing you would do like on Christmas. Just be jolly, be joyous, and the
Not
mood.
Everybody celebrates Christmas.
I think
though.
right.
There are other religions.
There are. I'm not saying, I'm just saying to be joyous in all you do, right? Enjoy it. I think Halloween just so happens to fit the fall mood very well.
It's perfect.
It's also great for, skateboarding or kayaking or hiking or doing pretty much everything else I enjoy doing as well. So yeah, we got some places we're gonna get out and shoot some video footage of this coming week. So we got a lot of stuff to bring you guys up. There's a lot I really want to do for the month of October. I know it's weird because I guess a lot of people that are into cryptids and the paranormal and unknown are also into Halloween and stuff like that, which is weird because a lot of the stuff is fictional and
because it's when the weirdos come out.
Right.
I'm just playing.
It is, yeah. Weirdos are cool though. You just gotta keep it, keep it somewhat cool, functional, You gotta be functioning. I think that was my problem for a while. I was like, I had to learn to function, right?
I suppose.
In every environment, like in every season of your life, it's one thing you gotta do is you gotta learn to function. Because you don't always have what you have to function with at other times, so it's you always gotta make readjustments.
So what's up? What's
Well, I got a couple stories to share today. Also, I want to talk. I know we don't review movies or anything, but we did just watch a movie with the kids, and it was something that was a pretty big deal to you because you're a huge fan of the movie's predecessor. And the movie I'm talking about is Hocus Pocus 2. It came out on Disney Plus today, today being September 30th, 2022. And if you guys haven't had a chance to check it out, I gotta say, I highly recommend it.
It was good.
I'll be the first to admit that I had mentioned to you earlier this week that I was afraid they were going to use new actors and maybe new circumstances to ruin the movie as they do with a lot of sequels. And I gotta say that did not happen at all.
It was good.
And there were opportune times it could have happened. They never seized the opportunity to destroy the movie.
Thank goodness.
In fact, I'm not saying any spoilers. You guys gotta check it out. Not even anything, nothing. I want to keep my mouth shut.
I did cry though at the end.
Very
unexpected. I did, because it was like, for me,
kind of like
it was the end of something for me.
I know what you mean, but
was it though?
Was it?
I mean, for what it is and who they are, it has to be.
You think?
Yeah, I do.
I hope you're right. If
And
I
you're
thought
gonna ruin
you
it
were
if you
right,
go beyond it.
I agree with you, but
you can't make another one and it be good after that. There's no way. So it really was like the end for me.
For you, but do you think it was for them? I don't know if it was.
I mean, I don't want to say anything too much, but I feel like it was the ending for me.
Anyway, I thought it was a great movie. What do you guys think about it if you checked it out? And also, one thing I want to do for the month of October is I don't want to just do the podcast. There are a couple things I would like to upload, maybe. I don't know exactly what, but I got some ideas. Maybe go to some locations that are supposedly haunted or something. Just something for Halloween.
Ooh, what about that place? I don't know where it's at. Your dad was telling us about it. Like when it rains.
Right. Yeah.
At a cemetery.
Even, right.
Something
like that.
People see things.
There's a couple things
at, but we need to go check that place out.
Want to do for the month of October. And this channel for Hill Shadows. Yeah. So one thing I would like to do is I want to share some stories from you guys, like real life encounters. Even if you've heard a story from somebody, I don't care. I just want to share real life encounters. If you guys have a story or you know somebody that may have a story, please contact us at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com and we'll be glad to share your story in an upcoming episode. So yeah, if you guys have a story or you know someone who may have a story that would like to share, email us that story at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com and we will talk about and share your encounter or story on one of our episodes. That being said, you got anything else you want to talk about before we get into some...
I don't think so.
Some scary stuff? We haven't even talked about what we do on this channel. I know. We cover the strange, unusual, paranormal, unknown, anything that's out of the ordinary that may intrigue us. We like to cover that kind of content here, and also, we like to share real life encounters of any type of stories of the unknown and paranormal. If you guys like that kind of stuff, please hit the subscribe button. And if you guys like our videos, hit the like button. If you don't, hit the dislike button, so that way it kind of gives us an idea of the type of content you guys want to hear and the kind of stuff you don't want to hear. And you want me to go ahead and get into it first, or?
Well, do you know what is today about?
What is today about? Well, I don't really have
in honor of it being,
it's
October.
Like the Halloween episode. I would like to. It's what we're going into, right? We're going into Halloween time. What are you saying? I don't know. I don't have a particular topic. Like, what are you saying? It's not like a
I don't know.
theme.
I guess I was confused.
Yeah, I've got like two completely different types of stories. I've got one is
what my understanding was.
I didn't know you had an understanding. I'm sorry. Anyway, I've got two different things. One of them is about a place in Kentucky, I guess, a thing that happened at a particular place, and one of them is about more or less it's something I've got from Reddit that was posted by someone who lives somewhere in a remote area in Kentucky, and just a few little random things on this one, so I guess I can go ahead and get into this if that's what you would like.
Good.
So I've got this story from Reddit. The title of the post here is The Oddities of Kentucky's Woodlands.
Okay.
And the OP is a user that goes by the name of Kentucky Blue Eyes. Now I'll leave the link and everything in the description. And here we go. Well, if you've ever read any of my stories, or even my name, you'll realize that I'm living in Kentucky. No hillbilly jokes, please. It's bad enough I have to see them daily. I don't want to read them as well, but I'd venture to guess you would like to hear about some of the strange things that happen around here. For instance, People tend to go missing in the national forest here around the same time every year. And after about a week, nobody mentions them again. If you do happen to remember them vanishing, don't mention it because people will either look at you as if you've grown a second face or just act as though you're effing nuts. I was a ranger for the forestry department for 4 years, and every year from April to May, without fail, 8 to 10 people would vanish from the campgrounds, hiking trails, or other little tourist traps.
Huh.
It's always the same. The family will have just seen the missing person mere seconds before turning to find them gone without a trace. For the most part, it is usually no more than 1 or 2 people from a family that vanish at a time, although we did have one entire family, 9 people, disappear from a campground overnight. Their tents were found to be zipped and latched from the inside the next morning, like they had just blinked out of existence. We looked for them for a week straight, every day from sunup till midnight. I don't mean that 2 or 3 of us went looking. I mean teams of 20 or 30 in a small area. We combed the woods in the surrounding areas. Bloodhounds couldn't catch a smell. Helicopters couldn't catch a heat signal. Nothing. They were effing gone. On the morning of the 8th day, I was riding to the campsite with my boss. We pulled into the parking area and found the family, all 9 of them, laid out like they had just taken a nap on the dew-soaked grass. The kids were still alive. The adults weren't so lucky.
What?
Or perhaps the adults were the lucky ones. The kids still haven't spoken a single word. Their teeth had been removed, though there were no tool marks, no stitches, nothing. The kids also had suffered severe trauma to their eardrums, rendering them deaf. The adults were missing random organs and bones. Again, no incisions were visible. Shit, next subject. The fact that there is something that lives in the woods in Wolfe County, some locals say it's a bear, but it's not. It does walk on all 4s at times, but normally it walks bipedal. It is known to kill and eat calves, pigs, sheep, chicken, and even dogs. I've never seen it personally, but something killed 2 of my bull calves and ate their throats. Nothing else, just the throats. I bought another calf and a game camera with night vision to try to catch whatever it was, but it hasn't shown up again. The locals that refuse to believe it's a bear call it the hillbilly beast. Suiting name, I guess. The same county has a legend of a lady in white that's supposedly looking for her husband or lover or some such shit. I don't know what the crazy undead bitch is after, but I have seen her, and she will mess you up. If I hadn't been able to get my quad started, she would have killed me.
What?
I'd been out planting my special Japanese tomatoes at night to limit the chances I'd be seen. I had just finished planting them when the warm night air took a heavy chill and the frogs, crickets, and birds hushed. I noticed the sudden shift in mood and looked around. When I turned around, I found myself face to face, for lack of a better phrase, with something I will never be able to forget. It was a face, but not of any live person. Her skin was pale and bluish, with hair a deep dead black color, all matted and knotted together. Her eyes white with death's hue, and the smell that poured off of her was the stench of hot death. Her jaw fell open with a disgusting splorch, and she screamed this ear-splitting, bone-rattling noise that couldn't be reproduced by any human. I turned to run as she reached one of her bony hands out and grabbed my shoulder. For a brief second, I looked at her hand. I noticed the skin was falling from the bones, and her nails were already gone. I don't know how or how much time it took, but I made it to my quad and managed to get it started. I couldn't make myself look back as I accelerated away, and that from the bitch that had been chasing me.
Well, that is horrible.
That is horrible, absolutely.
Is that it?
And for the most part, yeah, that's the 2 main encounters from that story.
Huh.
That
sounds terrible.
Yeah, so that's the lady in white. And also, I've heard a couple different stories that talk about this family that we supposedly found. I don't know
Well,
I
hold
haven't
on.
been
Let me
able to
read you my
find
little
anything.
story, and then you can do that one, okay?
I haven't found any facts on it yet, but I keep hearing little things that
Well, that one that you just read was about Wolf County, right?
Right. Correct.
I'm gonna have to do a little bit of research on that family.
Yeah,
Like if
family
that's
of
true.
9.
Like organs
now.
removed.
Hmm.
Organs have been removed from the adults.
You know, it reminds me a lot of the
That's some alien stuff.
where is this at? Because
It said Wolf County.
is that the land between the lakes?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Well, because there is a I know you've heard about the family that was supposedly.
I'm sorry. I keep yawning. What was that?
So yeah, I think it could have been like the land between the lakes where the family had went missing or whatever.
Are you sure?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but
I have a story pulled up on my phone, so it's hard for me to like go back and research that. But I will here in a minute to find out exactly.
What kind of story do you have for us tonight?
It's supposed to be like a true little scary story. It's not really long at all, but
Do you need to set anything up, or are you just gonna get right into it?
no, these were just I just looked up like true scary stories.
Mm-hmm.
And found like a list and read all of them. And this is one that I thought was a little bit creepy. Actually, I have a couple of them, but I'm just gonna do this one right now, and it's called Little Hands.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. So it's actually, well, it's someone else telling a story. Like, let me just read it. Let me see where it starts. Okay, I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen. So a Reddit user, patented Space Hook, recounting a true event. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a family. One night, the daughter went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and the mother asked my uncle, my mother's brother, to check on their pets. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went over with him. My mother had heard there was a grand piano, and she wanted to play it. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and father headed to the basement to see the animals, and my mother went to the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. She kept playing, and then she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started again, she felt hands clasp her legs tightly. She dashed to the basement door, called my uncle and father, and waited for them. Back outside, my uncle could tell my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what had happened, and he turned white. He told her the daughter who died used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. That's the end of it.
Oh, is that
it could have been wrote a lot better than that, but
that's interesting.
I thought it was a little creepy. I was sitting out on the front porch. It's, pretty dark out there, and I was trying to
it's a very creepy
these.
night.
It is a creepy night. I freaked myself out reading it.
I could have told
it doesn't seem that scary reading it now.
You were not going to be able to handle that.
No. It was scary to me outside.
I don't know if
the little hands grabbing.
If there ever was truly a perfectly Halloween looking night, but it is tonight. It's very much that out there right now. The wind is blowing. It's sporadically cloudy. It's very Halloween-esque.
Yeah. Well, I have one more. Do you want me to go ahead and read it and then?
Yeah. Do you need to set this other one up or?
No. Again, it's just a Reddit user.
Oh, okay. You might want to give us the users and the posts.
I did on the last one
as well.
Okay. Yeah. I
And
told
make
you I
sure
just
you
looked up like.
also write them down so I can put them in the description.
Oh, okay. Well, give me just a second so I can make sure I know what this one is. Let's see. All right.
All right.
Hold on. I was trying to make sure I had this name right. Now let me find this other story again. It's called The Eerie Attic. And the Reddit user is Diggs Dawes.
Okay.
All right.
Let's get it.
So, a few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months. When I came home from work one day, went into the bathroom, and I saw something strange. A wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space, lay fractured in two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you're able to." I called, and she explained that her last two tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There's no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I never heard him make those sort of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some stuff that's been going on there. Forget it. It's their problem now.
Okay.
Yeah. Trying to
Not
kill the bird.
first. Poor Dexter, man.
Right?
Poor Dexter.
Sad.
See, now, I don't condone abuse of animals by any sort of paranormal entities.
Right?
I just ain't with that shit.
Or from anyone.
Well, no, not at all. No. I mean, I've never seen anything of the paranormal nature. Like, not a ghost or anything. I want to very much.
No, you don't.
I do. You
You
know
do
I
not.
do. I do.
Nope.
I do, but I don't know that I will. But I suppose If I ever do, I will let you guys know, though.
Ooh, I had a weird little incident happen recently. Remember?
Did you?
Yeah, I told you about this. I was over at my mom's.
Oh, yeah, the pen or something?
Yeah, we were talking about my sister, who had just recently passed away, a year and a half ago.
Right.
And there was a Sharpie marker laying, like there's a little console thing in the middle of, like, their couch, you know? And the Sharpie just, like, turned. Like, I don't know, the way it moved, like, it was very intentional.
Right, yeah.
But that was it. Like, that was it.
I've never seen anything like that.
It was crazy, like, the way it moved. We looked at each other like...
I've often... Yes, I bet you did. It's weird.
It was very strange.
I don't know. I might have seen some weird things like that. But as far as...
Well, how do you explain that? If you've seen something like that and you know it shouldn't be moving, like, what do you...
I don't have an explanation, but I have a theory that it could... I think the energy could have something to do with the observers as much as it does...
The energy?
Whatever's taking place. I don't know what it is.
But, like, what do you mean by that?
I think it could be as much something to do with the person who observes it as it is with the phenomenon.
But it's not like we were looking directly at it. It was... We were just talking, and it happened to be right in the middle of us.
Did you guys create the energy?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I could be. I mean, I'm probably wrong. I don't know.
I
just try to understand why.
I do think it's possible to do what you are saying. I think.
Why are there some people who cannot see things?
I don't know, but you seem to be one of those people.
Yeah, I do seem to be one of those people.
I've seen so many things. Like, it's not fun for me.
But I subject myself to seeing things, and I still can't see things. So what's that?
I don't know what that means.
What's that about?
I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, it doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I got one more story. I don't know. Should I get into it already? I mean, I guess we could go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little tired tonight.
I'm a little tired tonight, too, but I'll tell you what.
We kind of brought this up.
We did bring
briefly.
It up briefly before, and I'll go ahead and do this. I mean, I'll tell you what. I'll read through it as quickly as I can, but we're doing a special little Halloween type episode here, so we'll go ahead and cover the strange case of Edmonson, Kentucky, which is...
I think it's
a fascinating little story.
It is absolutely fascinating story.
And I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I got this from Creepypasta.
But that's not the only place.
But it's not
absolutely
from Creepypasta.
No, it's not.
This is where I'm reading the story here from. But this is an absolute true story.
It is true, yes.
And this is my first time reading this as well, so I'm actually...
Well, from this.
Right.
We've completely heard the whole story.
I'm familiar with it, but this is my first time reading this particular story.
Okay, well, let's see if it lines up with...
So I'm hoping maybe I'll learn some things here, too. So let's get into this. On October 16th, 1962, every man, woman, and child disappeared from the town of Edmonson, Kentucky. The date... hold on.
Sorry.
Let me put my reading glasses on.
That's probably a good idea.
And try to tackle this again. The date is relatively easy to pin down. The day before, October 15th, a traveling salesman named Arnold Johnson passed through the small town in an unsuccessful attempt to sell an exciting new product, the bagless vacuum cleaner. During an interview with authorities afterwards, Johnson said he noticed nothing unusual about Edmondson in the day before the disappearances. He did, however, remark that none of the housewives he spoke with during his brief stay seemed remotely interested in his product.
It was pretty accurate.
Something he found slightly surprising compared to the response he typically received when demonstrating the vacuum cleaner to similarly sized towns. Not only did I not sell a single vacuum cleaner, but no one even wanted to see the product in action, he said during the interview. If you could get in the door and show the women what the vacuum could do, you were guaranteed to sell. Johnson chalked up his failure to the apprehension related to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which had begun a day before he had been dominating the airwaves. "It's hard to sell a vacuum cleaner when your audience thinks there's a possibility there'll be radioactive dust by the end of the week," he said. Johnson left the town of Edmondson the evening of October 15th. The next town on his sales route, Clement, was 80 miles away. He drove all night and didn't think about Edmonson until investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation knocked on his door 2 weeks later. During the early morning hours of October 17th, Randall Pierce, a farmer who sold his produce to the only grocer in Edmonson, drove into town to discover empty streets and closed storefronts. "It was eerie," Pierce told the county newspaper later. "Usually at 7 in the morning that little town was bustling. I thought I had maybe driven up during a holiday." Pierce lived with his wife and 3 children on a farm 15 miles outside of Edmonson. Like most farming families in the early 1960s, Pierce's wife homeschooled their children when they weren't helping their father tend the farm. "But I couldn't think of any holiday that would close up a town in the middle of October, so I started getting a little spooked," Pierce said. "I knocked on the doors of a few houses and didn't get a response from any of them. Around 8 o'clock, I realized there wasn't a single soul in Edmonson." Shaken and a little disoriented, Pierce returned home to his wife and children. He told them that what he had seen, or not seen, in Edmonson, and with naturalistic fears of a communistic invasion running rampant, his wife convinced him to drive to Clement and report what he had seen to the authorities. The Pierce family had no phone at their farm. Pierce arrived in Clement shortly after noon and immediately pulled into the parking lot of the local police department. He told the authorities what he had witnessed in Edmonson. Initially, as Pierce tells it, his story was met with disbelief and ridicule, but after multiple calls to Edmonson's police chief went unanswered, Clement's sheriff, Jonathan Ambrose, gathered a group of men and traveled to Edmonson to investigate Pierce's claims. Sheriff Ambrose died of lung cancer in 1968. However, in spite of being a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, on his deathbed, Ambrose said that his visit to Edmonson on October 17th was the most disturbing and haunting experience of my entire life, and thinking about the events of that day would still turn the blood in his veins to ice. According to the most recent census, 236 individuals lived in Edmonson in 1960. It was a small town nestled between the hills of western Kentucky, named after a captain who was killed during the Battle of 1812. Edmonson was populated primarily by the ancestors who founded the town in 1825. Edmonson had one public school, a grocery store, a bank, a Wells Fargo, a hospital clinic, 2 churches, and a post office. Most of the men worked small farms, like Pierce, or ran a trade. Edmonson, like most small communities in rural areas, was self-sufficient and self-sustaining. Every 2 weeks, the grocery store would be restocked and the post office would deliver mail every Tuesday. For entertainment, residents of Edmonson would have to visit Clement or another nearby town. On October 17, 1962, Clement Sheriff Ambrose, 2 deputies, and the Clement's primary physician piled into a squad car and followed country farmer Randall Pierce back into Edmonson. Ambrose carried his service pistol, a M1911A1 .45, and ordered his deputies to bring their shotguns. The physician, Alan Cathy, was brought along in case a mass casualty event had taken place. Before he died in 1968, Ambrose recounted the events of October 17th to his older son, who transcribed his father's testimony and published it in a men's magazine to little fanfare in 1974. It was a 2-hour drive from Clement to Edmonson, and we all expected to show up in that little town and find nothing wrong except for a drunk police chief who overslept his shift, Ambrose said. However, I couldn't deny the fact that a palatable tension was present in the squad car. My 2 deputies kept fiddling with their shotguns, and Cathy wouldn't stop rummaging through his physician's bag. It was the same type of behavior I observed among soldiers before we were set to launch a big assault. Upon arriving in Edmonson, they immediately realized something was in fact very wrong. Pierce and Ambrose parked their cars in front of the grocery store along the main street. It was just as Pierce had described it. the town seemed completely devoid of life. Ambrose, who personally knew Edmonson's police chief and where he lived, decided they should check out his home first. The 5 men set out on foot into the residential neighborhood. All the men were struck by the silence. It was then that one of the deputies realized that not only were there no people in town, there were no animals to speak of. Yards with fences that clearly meant to keep dogs in were notably empty. The men arrived at the police chief's home to find the front door unlocked. Ambrose, with his gun drawn, entered the house first and was followed by his 2 shotgun-toting deputies. "I don't know what we were expecting to find," said Ambrose. "I honestly thought we'd find a body. Maybe poisonous gas had leaked from the ground at some point during the night and killed off the whole town. But I think what we found was worse. The police chief's house was empty. The bed was made in the bedroom, and the fridge still contained bottles of fresh milk. The men were baffled. Maybe, they thought, the townspeople had left to attend a large community picnic, but as the hours dragged on and the search continued, that possibility grew less likely. "We searched 6 other houses in the neighborhood after we canvassed the police chief's house," Ambrose said. "It was always the same story. The house seemed fine, no sign of forced entries, unlocked doors, and no occupants. However, a few similarities began to make themselves apparent as the men made their way from house to house. For one, there was no luggage to be found anywhere in the homes, and it appeared as if a majority of the clothing was missing from drawers and wardrobes. Pierce, the farmer, also noticed that much of the food left in the pantries and refrigerators was perishable. There were no canned goods. Ambrose, who had just finished reading C.S. Lewis' The Great Divorce, remembered thinking it's as if the whole town just packed up their belongings and boarded a bus to heaven." Some of the discoveries were less benign. In the backyard of one home, the men discovered a dead Labrador retriever. One of the deputies stumbled across the animal and thought at first it was sleeping. The dog was wearing a collar and was loosely chained to a tree in the backyard. It was the first animal they'd seen in Edmonson since arriving 2 hours earlier. While the men searched the home, Kathy, the physician, performed an ad hoc autopsy on the animal. Rigor mortis had only recently set in, indicating the dog had not been dead for more than a day. Additionally, Kathy found raw hamburger meat in the animal's stomach, hamburger meat that had been prepped with small white pills. The dog had been poisoned. In another home, they found the words, "Revelation 9:1" scrawled onto a bathroom mirror in light pink lipstick. The men were unfamiliar with the Bible verse, and this led to the next disquieting discovery. They could not find a single Bible in the town. Edmonson had 2 churches, and it can be deduced that a majority of the township probably attended one or the other. In the early 1960s, a vast majority of Americans considered themselves Christian, and even those who wouldn't consider themselves very devoted could be expected to at least own a Bible. However, Ambrose and his men couldn't locate a Bible in any of the homes they searched. When they inspected both churches, they found only hymnals or books of common prayer in the pews. Except for the poisoned dog, during their 3-hour search of Edmonson, they found no signs of violence or struggle. Every home's interior looked impeccable, and running water and electricity appeared to be in working order. Ambrose was reminded of the model communities the U.S. Army had built in New Mexico to test the destructive power of the atom bomb. As the sun began to slip beneath the trees and the men's shadows grew longer and dimmer, Ambrose detected another palpable sense of urgency brewing among members of the group. "It was obvious the men didn't want to remain in Edmonson after sundown," Ambrose said, "and I felt it too. I somehow sensed that if we stayed in Edmonson overnight, there'd be another group of men from Clement trying to find us the next afternoon, and I don't think they'd find us." Before twilight ended, the men loaded up their cars, the 2 deputies, Kathy and Ambrose in the squad car, and Pierce in his truck, and left Edmonson. Even though they knew the town was empty, each man reported a creeping sensation that they were being watched from the darkened windows of the homes they passed on their way out of town. "We didn't talk much on the ride back to Clement, and I'd be lying if I said I was driving with any regard toward the speed limit," Ambrose said. "We had to get out of there. At that point, I was convinced we had stumbled across ground zero of some new communist weapon system. something that could vaporize the inhabitants of the entire town without causing any collateral damage. But even then, I knew that story didn't completely add up. After the men arrived back in Clement, they agreed that Ambrose would contact the federal government in the morning. None of the men expressed any interest in returning to Edmonson. That night, Ambrose retrieved his family's Bible from their study and flipped to Revelation 9:1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. I didn't know what to make of that, Ambrose said. The next morning, Ambrose reported what he had seen in Edmonson to the governing authorities in Frankfurt. Things began moving very quickly after that. While the rest of the world was transfixed by the escalating tensions between Cuba and the United States, the FBI sent an investigative team to investigate the disappearances at Edmonson. Fearing a communist plot, or, as Ambrose had suspected, the use of a powerful new weapon, the FBI shut down access to Edmonson on October 19, 1962. The strange case of Edmonson made its way into a few local papers, but it was a story that always ended up buried behind pages of international news. Because many of the town's inhabitants were ancestors of the people who founded the town, there weren't too many relatives inquiring about the status of their loved ones. The roads that passed through Edmonson, there were very few, were rerouted around the town. The FBI finished their investigation in 1967, but by then no one really cared about Edmonson anymore. In between the town's disappearance in 1962 and the FBI's final report on the incident, the nation's attention had been distracted by a number of earth-shattering events: the assassination of President Kennedy, the burgeoning civil rights movement, and the U.S.'s involvement in Vietnam. Unfortunately, the results of the FBI's investigation were sealed and deemed confidential. As the decades progressed, nature began to overtake Edmonson, Kentucky. No attempt was made to rebuild or resettle the town. Edmonson soon became a little-known historical footnote in Kentucky's history. While many of the structures collapsed due to exposure, a handful of homes and one of the churches remained standing, enshrouded by thick vines and a thriving deer population. In 2002, the official report from the FBI was made public after a local historian placed a Freedom of Information request. Dennis Miller, president and sole member of the Edmonson Historical Society, learned the FBI officially declared the reason for the town's spontaneous abandonment as fears related to the possibility of nuclear annihilation and unexplained atmospheric phenomenon led to a panic-induced dispersal of the town. Of course, that reasoning was bullshit, Miller said. The report doesn't even mention the fact that none of the townspeople had ever been accounted for. There were no reports of atmospheric phenomena by anyone in the area. However, by then, a new theory had emerged regarding the fate of the Edmonsons inhabitants, a theory that began circulating after two self-proclaimed backyard adventurers stumbled upon a hatch in the basement of the abandoned First Baptist Church of Edmonson. The Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is the world's largest known cave system. At least 400 miles have been mapped, and some scientists estimate there could be another 600 miles that are unexplored and have never been seen by human eyes. As of 2016, 26 entrances into the cave system have been discovered. And in 1981, one of those entrances was discovered in the ruins of Edmonson, Kentucky. During the late 1970s, the abandoned ruins of Edmonson attained a cult status among backpackers and hitchhikers in the area. With the roads leading to Edmonson in disrepair, getting to the abandoned town is extremely difficult. But every year, intrepid amateur adventurers and curious locals would make the trek to one of the country's greatest but forgotten unsolved mysteries. 19 years after the disappearances, hikers Emilio Stevens and Julie Page parked their vehicles 30 miles outside the edges of the forest that surround the abandoned township and began their trek to Edmonson. We'd visited Edmonson 2 years before that day, Stevens said to Scientific Journal afterwards. It's creepy as hell. It takes you about a day and a half to reach the town from the trailhead, and when you get there, you really don't feel like sticking around. Most hikers pass through it or camp overnight on the outskirts. That November, Julie and I planned on staying overnight in the church. I think it was more about testing our nerves than anything else. The church Stevens is talking about is the First Baptist Church of Edmonson. It's the largest structure still standing in the town. The grocery store and the Methodist church collapsed in the late 1960s. We arrived in Edmonson around nightfall on the second day, Stevens said. Julie wasn't feeling too hot, and it was beginning to sprinkle. We set our tent in the center of the church and prepared for our night. I could tell it was going to be a miserable night. The roof of the church leaked, and a lot of pews had been destroyed by vandals and raccoons. As they settled in for the night, Stevens and Page both couldn't shake a creeping sense of dread. Even though they had hiked into Edmonson before, they both felt unprepared for the degree of uneasiness they were experiencing. Around midnight, however, exhaustion got the better of the two of them, and they fell asleep. 2 hours later, Stevens awoke to a loud cracking sound. I first thought it was thunder, but then the floor slanted and we were falling, Stevens said. There is nothing more disorienting than waking up in a tent and experiencing the sensation of free fall. The floor of the church had collapsed in the middle of the night, flinging Stevens and Page into an as of yet undiscovered basement. Luckily, both Stevens and Page survived the fall without any serious injury. We were both pretty shaken and frankly a little banged up, Stevens said. But in all the time we had spent in and around Edmonson, we had never heard of a basement in the Baptist church. We knew we had found something no one else knew about. Armed with only their flashlights, Stevens and Page set exploring the decrepit basement. The room hidden beneath the floorboards of the church was small and appeared to have been carved into the bedrock beneath the building's foundation. Stevens said there wasn't much to see. It looked as if the room had been used to store extra tables and chairs, presumably for after-church socials. But then they found the hatch. Page found it in the far corner of the basement, Stevens said. It was set flush against the floor of the basement, and it was made of the 4 thick wood planks, and the hinges had been bolted into the bedrocks on the left side. The door had one of those old-fashioned drop ring handles. Stevens gripped a hold of the drop ring handle, and after several tries, wrenched the hatch open. A square of darkness stared back up at him. Page activated and dropped a glow stick into the shaft. The pale green glow of the stick stopped at about 5 feet from the mouth of the hatch. Well, we had to go down there, Stevens said. It was probably 3 in the morning, and we were for sure as hell weren't going back to sleep. Stevens tied a climbing rope to his backpack loop and dropped down through the hatch. Page stayed above and metered out the rope as Stevens progressed into the darkness. At the bottom of the shaft, a passageway opened up to my left, pointing westward. It was obvious by then that I was traveling through a cave tunnel and that it was not man-made, Stevens said. Eventually the tunnel tightened and Stevens found himself crawling on his hands and knees. The roof of the passageway scratched his back and his hands began to get rubbed raw by the cave's rough floor. I'm not claustrophobic, but it started getting pretty tight, Stevens said. I began to worry about not being able to turn around and get back to the hatch, but I started to hear something coming from up ahead of me. I should have been freaked out, but at that point, I figured I had gone too far to bail. After 15 minutes of crawling, Stevens was straining to push his shoulders through the ever-tightening passageway, but the eerie noises emanating from ahead drove him deeper into the cave. However, his adventure came to an abrupt end. The passageway ended at a pile of rocks, Stevens said. Each rock looked to be about the size of my head, and they completely blocked any further spelunking. I could hear the noises clearly now, could even distinguish words and phrases, but my journey was done. However, right before the passageway terminated at the cave end, Stevens found a couple of objects. He put them in his jacket and began backing out. It took him 30 minutes to back up out of the tight passageway. When he made it up out of the shaft and back into the church's basement to a relieved Page, he took out the objects and inspected them. I had found a pair of eyeglasses, like old-fashioned reader's glasses, and a woman's shoe with the heel missing, Stevens said. It didn't mean anything to us at the time. Stevens and Page hiked out of Edmonson early the next morning, battered and spooked. When they reached their car, they immediately headed into Mammoth Cave National Park and reported what they had found to a park ranger. In the investigation that followed, it was determined that Stevens and Page had discovered an entrance into an unmapped portion of the Mammoth Cave system. Unfortunately, geologists determined that the cave-in that had stopped Stevens' progress was at least 100 feet thick. Unless they used explosives, there was no way to investigate further. However, it was the discovery of the cave entrance coupled with the objects that Stevens found that held disturbing implications for the unsolved mystery of the disappearances in Edmonson nearly 20 years prior. Historians dated the eyeglasses and the women's shoe to the late 1950s and early 1960s. Most historians and geological experts are now in near unanimous agreement about what happened to the inhabitants of Edmonson, Kentucky in 1962. Driven by fears of a first strike by Cuba during the missile crisis and religious fanaticism, the people of Edmonson sought refuge in a secret labyrinth cave system underneath their town. Unfortunately, a cave-in, perhaps triggered by their panicked influx through the tight passageways, trapped every man, woman, and child deep underground. It's deeply unsettling when you realize that at the same time Sheriff Ambrose and his men were exploring the town, that everyone they were searching for was probably about 400 feet underneath their feet, said Sam So, a ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park. If they had fresh water and food, and if the cave had a clean air supply, some experts believe that the people of Edmonson could have survived for at least 6 months underground. I reckon it's a pretty good theory, Stevens said, but it still doesn't explain what I heard that night. The reason I dropped down through that hatch and crawled on my hands and knees for 15 minutes. It doesn't explain the singing I heard while I was crawling down there. I clearly heard voices singing the hymn, Come Now, Font. Dennis Miller started the Edmondson Historical Society in 2001 to raise awareness about the town and the mystery surrounding it. He was 12 years old. It really is a 20th century Roanoke, Miller said, referencing the New England colony that disappeared in 1590, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to figure out what happened. Miller lives in Clement, and on his days when he's not researching Edmonson, he runs a small pawn shop. Many people would consider Miller's fascination with Edmonson to border an obsession, but when they learn about Miller's personal history with the area, it begins to make sense. During a family camping trip in 1997, Miller's father and mother went missing after making camp in the wilderness 3 miles north of Edmonson. Miller, who was 7 at the time, was with them when they disappeared. We camped often, and we used a big tent for the 3 of us, Miller said. That night, we went to bed around 9 after cooking hot dogs. I woke up around 1 in the morning and realized my parents weren't in the tent anymore, and the front flap was open. Miller spent 2 days alone in the woods, never straying far from the campsite in case his parents came back. After sustaining on hot dog burns and marshmallows, he was discovered by another of campers passing through the area. After searching the area for 2 weeks, the police officially concluded that I had been abandoned in the woods by my parents, Miller said. But that's not true. My parents loved me. I never doubted that, and if they had abandoned me, why didn't they hike to their car? It was found untouched at the trailhead. After the investigation closed, Miller spent the next decade of his life in and out of the foster care system. Driven by a desire to protect his parents' reputation and validate their love for him, Miller began reviewing historical records in libraries and did a sweep of the police records in the surrounding areas. Some might accuse Miller of attempting to connect unrelated dots, but some of his data and findings are shocking, to say the least. For example, the three counties that border the location of Edmonson have a missing persons rate 17 times higher than similarly sized counties in the United States. It's an area we sometimes refer to as the Kentucky Triangle, said FBI agent Brittany Hooper, head of the state's Missing Persons Division. For some reason, a lot of people seem to disappear in those counties. Some of the disappearances can be attributed to caving accidents, the vast swaths of unmapped wilderness, and the recent boom of meth operations in rural areas. Also, Stevens wasn't the first person to report hearing strange voices and singing in and around the Mammoth cave systems. Some people consider Mammoth National Park to be the most haunted national park in the U.S. There have been dozens of accounts of people hearing strange noises in the woods and caves since the 1970s, as well as sightings of a tall humanoid creature called the Black Demon, according to unrelated local lore. Geologists and historians dismiss many of these accounts. After Stevens had told authorities he had been following the voices of singing as he made his way through the passageways, expert cavers were quick to point out that even if he had heard people singing, it could not have come from behind the caved-in rocks. The cave-in was too thick for sound to penetrate. Also, because Mammoth Cave National Park sits on top of Mammoth Cave System, it's not unreasonable to assume that a lot of strange noises and voices are a result of sound bouncing and echoing throughout the caverns. Caves are, after all, notorious for their disorienting acoustics. But Miller has a different theory, a theory as macabre as it would be revelatory if it turned out to be true. I think some of the trapped people of Edmonson are still alive, Miller said. I think they're down there in an unmapped portion of the cave system and that they have chosen to stay below. It's been about 70 years since they went in, which means the first generation has probably mostly died off, and there's an entire second or third generation that only knows life underground. As for the disappearances, Miller has an answer for that as well. I think they've found other exits, and every now and again they come out and take people, hikers, drifters, campers, and locals, Miller said. I think that's what happened to my parents, and it has been happening years before they were taken, and it continues today. On his off days, you can find Miller searching the forests around Edmonson and the outskirts of Mammoth National Park for additional entrances into the cave system. He carries a GPS locator, rappelling gear, multiple flashlights, and a Colt 45 automatic pistol. For some reason, they don't want to be seen by us, Miller said. I don't know what they do with people they take, but I know what it takes to maintain an underground society. It requires food and a fresh gene pool. I don't like thinking about what that meant for my mom and dad, but even if the truth is ugly, at least I'll know, and I'll be able to do something about it. In spite of being armed, as soon as the sun begins to slink behind the trees, Millers makes sure to abandon his search and head back to his vehicle. You'll never find me spending the night in those woods again, Miller said. And that is it. That's my story on Edmonson, Kentucky. So, Ashley has fallen asleep on me over here, but I hope you guys have enjoyed the story on Edmonson. And please email us at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com. We'd love to share your guys' story. And I'm going to get off here and get ready to do the same shit I think she's doing, which is go to sleep.
Oh no, I fell asleep.
You have slept and reawoken, so you want to say goodbye?
Was I snoring?
No.
Whoops.
Anyway, that was a little bit longer, but it is the month of October, so let's make it count this month, guys. I hope y'all are having a wonderful week. Have a great weekend. And as always, we'll see you guys next weekend.
Bye.
Take care.